Time to present and answer questions. So my name is Debbie Solcher, and I'm on the professional education committee subcommittee of the TEA work group, tasked with bringing these webinars to you guys. And so we're glad you're all here. Many thanks to our presenters today. Our topic is reporting. So you will hear from Region 14. You will hear from DFPS and from a local CAC in Dallas regarding what happens when reports come in. What does that trail look like? What do those different agencies do, and services that are provided to families and youth? If you have a question, if you'll go ahead and put that in the chat as they come up for you, and myself and Nancy will be monitoring that. And after each presenter, we will have a chance to answer those questions, and then at the end, follow up with anything that comes up for the whole group. So with that, I'm going to let Rod Pruitt from Region 14 kick us off.
Okay, let me share my screen here. And there we go. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Rod Pruitt. I'm with the Title IV Part A School Safety State Initiative. And so we help with Title IV. One of the areas it does is school safety and mental health. And so we help provide guidance to school districts and other education service centers on the use of those funds. One of the topics that of a use of that fund is human trafficking. And so we're wanting to be able to provide some guidance today on that. And so as we go through, we're going to kind of show you some information that we know from the school side of things, and then be able to see it from other points of view as well. Typical disclaimer is the information we're giving you is the best that we understand right now. The laws change or interpretations change, and it sometimes changes that information. So, and also I would always say, as a school district, make sure that you seek your own legal counsel when needing to be able to help and intervene with students, especially in situations along these lines. So that's our typical disclaimer there. And again, I work with a great team. I'm not alone. I'm very blessed to have Nancy Golly as a partner in helping our schools and helping everybody. And we just recently have a new addition to our team is John Phillips, Dr. John Phillips. And so we're just excited to be able to provide that help and guidance to you. And so with no more further ado, so you had a major merger that occurred about 2015, where Title IV and state law kind of merged heavily in the area of providing school safety and mental health. And the idea was that school safety and mental health are both required for safety. And so as we're talking today, I can keep a kid physically safe by maybe reporting what is going on in their life, but also I need to be able to think about how am I keeping them psychologically safe? And that prevention is also part of safety as well. And so that concept and that idea got merged very heavily in 2015. And as we see from the 86th and the 87th legislature, that thought has continued as we've seen new signposting requirements for human trafficking coming out and other requirements coming out in the area of safety. And so just to understand that is how those things are merged. And so to really get our thinking around prevention is safety, mental health is safety, and then doing things to keep kids safe is safety. So just to be able to understand that those concepts are merged together. So when we look at the definition for child abuse, the one thing we also need to understand is child abuse can take many forms. We have things that we understand like neglect or physical abuse. And I think school districts get trained in that pretty well to understand. But one of the shifts that occurred in the 86 legislature was that human trafficking is a form of abuse. And so to be able to understand that, so I have neglect of a child, I have physical abuse of a child, sexual abuse of a child, but now that human trafficking is also a form of abuse. And so that was something that was really key to start understanding and trying to make sure that we understand that as we approach school in that circumstance. And so the definition for human trafficking is the recruitment, harboring, transportation, or procurement of any person, and it's for labor or services for the purpose of involuntary servitude, slavery, or forced commercial sex acts. And so when I look at that definition, it kind of breaks into two major parts. I have forced labor, and then I have forced commercial sex acts. And so to really truly understand that's what, when we say human trafficking, it could be the forced labor as a form of abuse, where maybe I take your documentation and say, hey, I'm going to keep this and threaten you with it unless you do this labor for me. Or it could be that boyfriend that says, hey, girlfriend, I really appreciate you and love you, but I really need you to sleep with my best friend. It's going to help me pay off a debt. And that could be a form of sex trafficking. So to understand that nuance, it's any time that this happens in any way. So it doesn't matter the age of the person that's in the power position or not. It's the idea that somebody's being forced to do something and they're being harmed by that. And so you see the recruitment, harboring, transportation, and procurement. But the other thing about this definition that's really key to understand is I don't have to move. I don't have to go anywhere for it to be considered human trafficking. I could be human trafficked sitting in my bedroom. If somebody took images of me, sexting images of me, and then they sell those, well, that's forced sex act. Okay, my body didn't touch any other body, but still I'm being harmed and I was forced into a situation. And so to be able to understand that the idea that nobody has to move, it can involve movement, but it doesn't have to involve movement. And when we really start understanding that definition, we can understand that kid could sit in our classroom day after day and be trafficked. It doesn't mean that they left our class, they left our school, or left our area. And that the fact that it can happen even from their own bedroom, they've never even left home, and this can occur, is something really key to understand in that definition. And so some warning signs to kind of look at when we look at this is with labor trafficking. And I won't go through all this list, but just using long, unusual, excessive work hours. Or there's evidence of violence. I see bruising or swelling or scarring on that kiddo. Being not paid on a regular schedule, or you hear that there's threats for being able to have to work. And so, and again, a lot of this may be that chronic back pain, muscle strain, or that chronic being tired. Oh, why are you tired? Oh, I had to work. I had to work late again. And then when we start digging into that a little bit more, it's like, oh, wait, those work conditions are not sacking groceries at the grocery store and going back home. That sounds different than that. And so to be able to look at these and understand, and I know school districts are required to have training in this, but I really want you to look at those warning signs, because in a second, we're going to see that these overlap into other issues that come into our school and other things that we're required to delve into. Sometimes for child sex trafficking, you might see, again, appearance of luxury items, manicures, designer clothes, or purchases. Probably one of the biggest things that I've always heard about is that cell phone that they will not give up, because the predator, the trafficker, is basically wanting constant contact. The phone becomes an electronic leash. And if I don't call them, I'm going to get in trouble. And we've had kids that during testing, when they have to give up their phone, absolutely will refuse and have that kind of meltdown moment. And so that could be some things to look at. Sometimes there's tattoos and brandings that are applied to kind of show an ownership of that person. Or maybe I have a lot of hotel cards or key cards or gift cards in my wallet, and you see that. Um, and so there could, or unexplained injuries, like we said, that may fall into more of, oh, that's what abuse is. Okay, that's what I recognize. So as you look at these warning signs, it's really key. And running away, the research will show that within 48 hours of a kid running away from home, they'll be contacted by human trafficking in some form. And I know that that sounds kind of shocking, but something as simple as, hey, yeah, you can come stay at my house. That's that couch surfing. Yeah, but it'll cost you. You'll have to do me a favor for that privilege. Well, then that falls into human trafficking. And so just knowing that if I have a kid that's running away from home, that's a huge red flag potential for them, along with lots of others. Drug use, often you see that drugs being applied to be able to exert control over those victims later. And so those are things to know. Again, not going to go into all of them, but wanting you to be aware of those as we look through and talk about how this looks. And so one of the key areas that we want to talk about then, after looking at this warning signs, is now there's some overlapping concerns. And what I mean by that is when I look at it, I could have student on student harm. I have a young lady that comes and reports to the counselor that her boyfriend bullies her. Well, on the surface, it's like, oh, she said the word bullying. Okay, well, then that's a bully report. We fill out a bully report and we take the steps. We have those clearly in place. We have requirements to be able to have anonymous reporting systems for bullying. And so that got reported as bullying. Okay, good. Well, we know what to do as a school. But then as we dig deeper, we realize that, oh, he's coercing her to give up photos of her to other people, or coercing her to do acts with other people. Well, okay, all of a sudden that bully report, now is this a Title IX or dating violence situation as well? Because if it's dating violence, then we got to report to the Title IX folks to make sure we're doing that well. Because now we have, harassment issues going on. And sexual harassment would require Title IX response by our district. And then we're going to see in a second, schools are all required to have a safe and supportive schools program team. One of the duties of that team is to conduct behavioral threat assessments. Well, this would fall under the team's requirements depending on how they set the threshold for themselves. Every district sets the threshold within the district. That might all of a sudden trigger a whole team to be able to have to review this and be able to look for resources and guidance. And then also you have a PEIMS discipline record that might be if there was something going on illegal and it broke your student code of conduct. And so one event that looks really simple, hey, bullying, we know what to do. When I start looking back at those warning signs, maybe we need to make sure that everybody understands. The person that receives bully reports needs to understand, hey, wait a second. Yeah, this looked like bullying on the surface, but now this looks like human trafficking. Or now this looks like abuse. Okay, I still need to follow up with bullying, but I also now have a duty to report for abuse. And so that's kind of what we're trying to look at, is that so often we do those trainings in silos. We did our human trafficking training and we sat there and watched a video, or our counselor talked to us, or the SRO came in and talked to us, and we did that training, and in all our minds we were thinking, oh, that's human trafficking, now we know. But the trouble is in our schools, that's not how these things present. Nobody walks in and says, hey, I'm being human trafficked or I'm being abused. Often it doesn't occur that way. And so to really make sure that we take that training and then apply it in every area that our school has responsibility, and making sure that the people that serve in these roles have a good understanding of human trafficking, because we have an obligation to maybe do 3 different things as a school, not just one. So hopefully that makes sense as we look. Um, always, if I believe somebody's immediately being harmed and hurt, I'm going to have that duty to report to law enforcement and report to CPS. Please understand that. And we'll get into that even more in depth. And we have folks here that are incredibly knowledgeable in that. But just wanted you to see this nuance that could occur with schools and school districts. To speak a little bit more in depth on that, if I look at behavioral threat assessments, and again, every school is required to conduct behavioral threat assessments. It's up to your district to decide how that's going to work. But in the Texas Education Code 37.115 and in your FFB policy, so if you do TASB policy, you can look at your FFB and it will say, hey, here's what our Safe and Supportive Schools program team looks like, who needs to be on this team. It also says, hey, here are the things that they need to maybe look and investigate. Well, if I look at this, it's any verbal threats, threat of self-harm, bullying, cyberbullying, fighting, a use of a weapon. But then all of a sudden we switch gears and I see sexual assault. Well, abuse and human trafficking, and that fits. Sexual harassment. Well, it could fit in what's required for human trafficking or abuse prevention. Dating violence, we have a whole prohibition against that at schools. But again, it could be dating violence, but it also could be human trafficking, depending on what factors we see. Stalking or assault. And so when I look at those, it's up to your district to determine when do they rise to the level of now the behavioral threat assessment folks need to do specific interventions, including mental health and behavioral support, or what discipline might need to be involved, or what law enforcement involvement needs to occur. And that's that team's major duty, is to decide those, kind of help with those 3 things. And they're supposed to create options for counseling or law enforcement involvement and those kind of things. So to be able to understand that and see that's what's required there is really key. And so that team is required to have whole training on how to conduct behavioral threat assessments. But that team, some of its members may have, because they work for the school, may have training in that. Other team members may not truly understand human trafficking. Or if I serve on this behavioral threat assessment team, I need to really pay attention and go, wait a second, this is abuse. We have a duty to warn. We have a duty to report. Or, hey, this is human trafficking. We have a duty to report beyond just what this team does. And so again, this team is required to follow the policies of the district as they fulfill this duty. And so this was created by the 86th legislature, and then further guidance was provided in the 87th. So just to let you know where that came from. And so as I look at this, you can look and see what are some of the policies that you might need to be able to look at, make sure that you follow and follow well. But the main thing I'm going to say is one of the major duties that schools need to do is develop protocols and procedures for identifying and reporting suspected victims, and develop actions that, how does that child or get assistance in our school? How does our school collaborate with CPS and law enforcement so that we don't interview this child 9 times and do more damage? And so that's the thing we see, is we have policy, but often we really need to look at our procedures on how we are going to help kids and how we involve outside help as well. So that would be a key takeaway of, hey, if I'm giving you a homework assignment today, it would be, how do we do this and do it well? Maybe we need to talk to CPS representatives. Maybe we need to talk to law enforcement representatives and say, hey, we did a Title IX investigation, but how do we do that and not mess up your investigation? How do we do our obligations? We have this obligation for us. You have your obligation. How do we make those work more effectively together? And maybe minimize the trauma and also maximize the help that we provide to students. So that's a key takeaway. So in this mandatory reporting, and I might be stealing from my folks that are about to present, but you can't not hear it enough, any person that has cause to believe that a child's physically or mental health or welfare has been adversely affected by abuse or neglect by any person. So we get hung up sometimes of, oh, well, it's the parents. Well, yes, often it is, but it could be, again, boyfriend or girlfriend. It could be somebody that they're both under the same roof. It could be an outside trafficker that could be doing this. It could be somebody else. But if you believe any person is basically harming this child, their welfare, their physical or mental health, then you shall immediately make a report as required by law. And it's really key to understand that the person that has the cause to believe is the one that has to report. I can't delegate that to a principal. I can't delegate it to another counselor. I have to be the one reporting because I'm the one that has the information. And so that's really key to understand, and that's in your district policies and procedures. So, and immediately, so we have to do that. That's not a wait and see moment. Again, under mandated reporting, if I believe this is an immediate emergency, that people are going to be harmed immediately, then I may need to just do what we do and get law enforcement, call 911 and say, hey, we have an immediate event. People are being harmed right now. Then I need to take that step. Again, or if I think, hey, I'm not sure, but I need to report this, then that abuse hotline, the 1-800-252-5400, because something needs to happen quickly. This kid, the potential for harm is there. We need to do something now. This can't wait. And then we also have the reporting hotline where schools can report online. Again, that one's kind of like you can wait days. So just to understand maybe how to do that. And again, my folks at DPS or DFPS are gonna explain that with much more grace than I just did, but wanted to make sure you're aware of that. And so, being able to go back to your campus or while you're at your campus and be able to go look at those policies and procedures is going to be really key. Making sure we understand, we may have a policy, but how do we actually follow that procedure in our school is going to be really key information to have. Making sure you have the required postings up. And again, the QR code that we had at the beginning of this presentation will get you to our state initiative page, and we'll put it in chat. And that will allow you folks to be able to see some of the resources we have there concerning the policies and procedures. But I hope this helps and gain a little perspective, again, from the school's point of view. But now we're going to dive even deeper with our other folks that are presenting today. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Rod. And now we'll have DFPS. Don't see any questions in the chat right now, so we'll move on for them.
Okay, and can you guys see my slides? Okay, perfect.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, well, thank you guys for having me. I'm excited to be here. My name is Amanda Frangu. I am with DFPS, and I am the Faith-Based and Community Engagement Specialist that liaison specifically with statewide intake, which is the reporting hotline. A little bit of background about me. I've been with the department for 17 and a half years. Most of that time has been spent at statewide intake as an intake specialist and supervisor. I did do 1 year in the field as a conservatorship worker with CPS. And in my current role with faith-based and community engagement, We do just what it sounds like, just build partnerships in the community with faith-based organizations and community organizations to meet the needs of children and elderly that are involved with the state, as well as providing these kind of presentations and educating about reporting and the different programs. And of course, today we are discussing reporting. And then just to begin, I want to give you guys an overview of our agency. Oh, you know what? I don't think it's clicking over. Let's see. Here we go. All right. So an overview of our agency. We have CPS, which is the largest program that has about 10,000 employees across the state. And then Adult Protective Services has about 1,000 employees across the state. And then we have the Division of Prevention and Early Intervention, which manages community-based programs that prevent juvenile delinquency and child maltreatment. And they have about 65 staff statewide. And then statewide intake is in support of the 3 field programs. We take information in from the public, assess it, and decide whether or not to recommend it for investigation. And we currently have about 468 staff statewide. All right, and as Rod mentioned before, here are our reporting hotline number and our reporting online website. We take information in for the entire state of Texas. We are a hotline that is 24/7, 365 days a year. Months during the school year are typically busier with longer hold times, as well as Monday through Friday. Business hours have higher hold times. And again, as mentioned before, if it is an emergency or a high priority situation, you are going to want to call the hotline because the online reporting system, the reports that go in through there aren't processed immediately in most cases. They can take up to a couple of days to be processed. Any trafficking concern should also be called into the hotline. Time is of the essence for these reports. Even if they don't fall under DFPS jurisdiction and it's a criminal matter, we still want you guys to call those in. Just because the way the online report is set up, we can't ask those specific questions to get out that information that we need for these types of very delicate situations. If it does, for a trafficking situation that does not fall under DFPS jurisdiction, we can still send our notification to law enforcement and the JCIC division, which investigates all trafficking concerns. All right, and then a recap of the definition. It recently changed slightly to Texas law says anyone who has reasonable cause to believe a child, elderly person, or adult with disability is being abused, neglected, or exploited must report. And so reasonable cause essentially means that in light of all of the surrounding facts and circumstances known, a reasonable person would believe that under those facts and circumstances, that abuse, neglect, or exploitation is occurring or has occurred. And again, a professional may not delegate to or rely on another person to make that report. When in doubt, definitely make your report. And when you do make your report, be clear on why you are calling and be prepared to articulate your concerns. Simply saying, I suspect XYZ allegation is not enough for us to assess appropriately and recommend an investigation. All right, and so here are some common reporting concerns that our reporters have. I'd say the most typical one that we hear is the concern about confidentiality. Many reporters do provide their information, but there are still many that are hesitant to provide that information. But we do remind everyone that the reporter's name and identity is kept confidential by state law. DFPS cannot reveal that information to who reported. I will say when when a professional or anyone really makes an online report, be cautious not to identify yourself in what you write in that report, because intake staff is not allowed to change how that is written. So just keep that in mind. Also, just be aware that people will try to say, I know it was you who reported, such and such told me. You can deny, because we cannot tell them who reported. And oftentimes that is an attempt to get you to admit to reporting. Another concern that our reporters have is if maybe they didn't receive the information firsthand or witness the incident, they don't want to be in trouble for reporting something that may not be true, but they would be covered under the good faith reporting law. If they are making that report in good faith, they would be immune from any civil or criminal liability. The only exception to that is if someone was calling to report themselves as a perpetrator of abuse, they would not then have that immunity. There's also criminal and civil penalties for failure to report and intentionally making false reports. Those things are a little bit harder to prove, but it does happen. All right, and this is just some important information needed for DFPS reports. You will be asked the name, age, and address of the child or vulnerable adult where the concern lies. The reporter's name and contact information is important for any follow-up that's necessary. A brief description of the situation and the child or vulnerable adult. Any current injuries, medical problems, or behavioral problems are going to be important to know to determine the severity of the situation, if there's any triggers to the abuse or anything like that. For a child, we do request parents' names, names of siblings, or anybody else in the household who might be another potential victim or another potential protective person in the home. And then for an adult, names of relatives in or outside the home and the name of the perpetrator. And then we do ask for the reporter's basis of knowledge. And again, it's okay if it wasn't witnessed firsthand or you didn't receive the original outcry, but it just lets the investigator know who they need to follow up with if they need to gather additional information. And then specifically for trafficking concerns, we would like to know what the parent or caregiver's role is in the situation. Do they have a role? Do they need to be listed as a perpetrator as well? Or if they have no knowledge of it and no role in it, that'll tell us that it's likely going to be on the criminal side as opposed to requiring DFPS involvement. And that goes really for any allegation, but it's especially important in the trafficking allegations. All right, about 20% of all of our reports submitted to DFPS are submitted through the online reporting website. I'm sure that many school professionals find that an effective alternative for reporting non-emergency situations. It saves them time for not having to wait on hold during those peak hours. However, it is important that we receive adequate information to assess and process reports that are submitted this way. We know you guys are intending to get help for vulnerable people, but when that information is vague, incomplete, or missing, it's very difficult to determine if an investigation should be recommended. So here are just some things to keep in mind when you submit a report this way. So just think of submitting an online report as if you were talking to a specialist on the phone and what type of information you would provide in that setting. You would provide the who, what, when, where, why, and how of the incident or the concern that you're reporting about. So the same information is needed when you're making an online report. And again, just selecting those check boxes and selecting an allegation is not going to provide the information that we need to assess it appropriately. And remember to add all relevant individuals, including the perpetrators or alleged perpetrators, to the person list. Another thing that's very helpful is including approximate ages if dates of birth are not known. This tells us a little bit more about the vulnerability of the child or children. And then describing any special needs or disabilities that affect the victim or client. And then include locating information. If you don't have the address, an approximate address would help. If the name of the school that the child attends or daycare. For the parents, if you don't have their address, but you know where they work, include that. That's going to help us locate the family. And then this is important, use plain and clear language and you avoid using jargon. We all have our own workplace jargon. Make sure that the language that you are using is a universal language that that everyone can understand what you're trying to say. And then in regards to the plain and clear, instead of saying, you know, the home is dirty. Well, what does that mean to you? What specifically would I observe if I were to walk into that home? Or if, you know, a child was witnessed being physically assaulted, instead of using the word beaten, well, what does that mean? Was there punching? Where on the body were they hit? Things like that. So just be very clear and precise in describing what's going on. And so another great tip for online reporting is making sure that you're focusing on the most current and relevant details and not focusing on, you know, maybe something that happened 5-10 years ago. If there is something in the historical context that's relevant to what's going on now, it's okay to mention it, but we just want to make sure that the bulk of the report is focused on the current and relevant situations. Okay, and then just some etiquette tips about reporting online. Of course, I think we're all professional enough to know, avoid using all caps, use paragraphs instead of block formatting. As much as possible, use proper grammar and punctuation. You guys know how those things, if you don't put the proper grammar or punctuation, it can mean something completely different. And then avoid copying and pasting identical information into multiple sections of the report. It would probably be better to say, see above or something like that, because our intake workers have to go through, even if it's the same exact information pasted 5 times, they have to go through that and make sure there isn't that one detail that's going to make a difference in the assessment. So just keep that in mind. And then again, filling out the person list with people who may have valuable information about the situation or who could be a support to the children or family is important. All right, so who can CPI investigate? So in CPI, the alleged victim is defined as children between the ages of 0 and 17. And then an alleged perpetrator has to be 10 years or older. It has to be a person traditionally responsible for the child's care, custody, or welfare. It could be a family member by blood or marriage. This will also include parents, boyfriend or girlfriend, whether they live in or outside of the home, any member of the child's household, and then school personnel or volunteers at the child's school as well. And then something to keep in mind, if you have a situation involving children that are in a foster home, another child that's in state care can never be assigned the role of an alleged perpetrator. However, if there is child-on-child abuse going on in a foster home, we still want it reported. It's just something that wouldn't be, that other child wouldn't be listed as an alleged perpetrator. It may be the foster parent or caregiver, or just we don't have a listed perpetrator. All right, and so here are a list of all of the allegations that are defined in the Texas Family Code that we can recommend for investigation. And the ones that you see with the stars next to them are the most common types of allegations that we are able to, that we process. And I know Rod went through some of those definitions earlier. The one I'll mention that I think is just the most difficult one for us to include in a case that's being recommended is emotional abuse, because that one has to have the observable and material impairment to the child's functioning, and it has to be linked to a specific incident or event caused by parent, caregiver, or one of those mentioned that could be an alleged perpetrator. And oftentimes we have one without the other. We might have, an action by parent or caregiver, but we don't see the observable effect, or we see all these observable effects, but we don't know what it was caused by. So just something to keep in mind if you run across those types of concerns. Let's see. Okay, so after this is just your general flow chart of what could happen after you make a report and it is recommended for investigation. So all intakes again come in through statewide intake, and it will be assigned a priority. When it's assigned a priority at intake, the field has the opportunity to upgrade or downgrade that priority if they find out any additional information that would deem it appropriate to do so. So at intake, it could be assigned a priority 1, in which the field has 24 hours to initiate the investigation. Priority 2, in which the field has 72 hours to initiate. And then a priority none. A priority none could be a situation where abuse or neglect happened years ago and there's no risk currently or in the foreseeable future. That could be an example, or it could be maybe perpetrator is currently deceased or something like that, but no risk currently. And so all priority nones or priority N and a subset of priority 2s are sent to investigation screeners. And they will make a contact with someone who, other than the reporter, to further assess the situation and the need for an investigation. So the subset of priority 2s that go to screeners would be, they can't have a child under the age of 6, and they can't have any open case history. If they do have a child under the age of 6 or have open case history, those are sent to investigations, not to the screeners. I will say this about the screeners. They have had some difficulty with getting cooperation from educators. I guess because they call instead of going out, they cover a large geographic region, so they can't go out to the schools. But they do call and try to interview that way to assess the situation. So if we could just share that with all of our educators, that they are welcome to ask the screeners to send them a copy of their work badge, or however they feel comfortable of them proving that they work for DFPS. But we do need to kind of do something to encourage better cooperation between the screeners and educators. But they do make contact by phone. So the investigation screeners, based on their further assessment, will determine whether or not to close the intake and not recommend it for investigation, or send it back to investigation. And the third option is to send it to alternative response. And alternative response is basically an opportunity for the family to kind of put together a support system, but it doesn't go on their record as having that CPS investigation. And then if something happens during the alternative response phase, it can go back to investigation. But once an investigation, it cannot go back the other way to alternative response. And then from investigation, you have 4 possibilities. The case could be closed with no further action necessary. It could be closed with community service, in which the family follows up with their own community services. And then it could be open to family-based safety services, and that's where the child remains in the home, but there are court-ordered services that the family needs to complete. And then the fourth option is removal, in which the child goes to substitute care. And there are court-ordered services during that one as well. All right, so who investigates? We have our investigation caseworkers that investigate the reports, assess safety and risk, and determine if further intervention is needed. Then we have our special investigators, which are going to be child protective investigators that have a law enforcement background. And these special investigators work with critical investigation tasks in high-risk cases, such as child death, serious bodily injury cases, sexual abuse cases, sex trafficking cases, and human trafficking cases as well. And then we also work with local law enforcement and investigate jointly with them when there's an immediate risk of physical or sexual abuse of a child that could result in death or serious harm. And so these are going to be mostly our priority one intakes. And then we work with children's advocacy centers, and they provide the forensic interviews of children as well as counseling of the children. And then some can provide for medical examinations of children on physical or sexual abuse cases. And then we have multidisciplinary teams that allow for law enforcement investigations, prosecutors, medical and mental health professionals to discuss cases and to assist in the transfer of information and provide appropriate services and identify where follow-up is necessary.
I'm here.
Okay. And so
Siri here. Let me know if I can
Siri's
help.
talking to me. Staff identify the least restrictive intervention that is reasonably anticipated to keep a child safe. So one of the goals of our department is to keep them together when possible. And of course, the least restrictive would be no intervention needed. Second would be child remains in the home with a safety plan. Third would be help from a protective family member. Alleged perpetrator leaves the home. And then fifth down on the list is the first option, in which the child actually leaves the environment that they're familiar with, and the protective parent leaves the home with the child. After that, the child would leave the home. And then, of course, the most restrictive would be the removal of the child and placed in state custody. And I know you guys work mostly with children, but there are some times when we do get calls from reporters that they just observe something in the child's household that is involving an adult. So it's just important to know who APS would serve, so that if you see that situation and recognize it, you can also call in on behalf of that person. But APS would serve 65 and older, which is considered our elderly population, or 18 years and older. Noticing my slide is not going. Okay. 18 years and older with a mental, physical, or developmental disability that substantially impairs the person's ability to provide adequately for their own care or protection. So basically that means if they require some kind of assistance with one of their basic activities of daily living, walking, bathing, meal prep, feeding themselves, managing their money, things like that, then they would qualify for APS. And for adult protective services, the allegations are emotional and verbal abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, medical neglect, physical neglect, and financial exploitation. And APS is different than CPS in that an elderly or disabled adult can be a self-perpetrator. So if they're not able to meet their own needs of like physical needs or their medical needs, that can be something that's called in as well. And that is all I have. I did also want to leave you guys with the contact information for not only myself, but our other faith-based and community engagement specialist that is over the youth and parenting helplines. And that is a great resource. I know that many of the schools have the materials put up around their schools, the posters in which youth in crisis can contact that helpline if they have any needs that they just want to kind of get out there and talk out. But it's a very, very helpful resource. And she would be more than willing to present on that. But they have a list of about 4,000 resources statewide that can help with concerns of emancipation, pregnancy resource centers, mental health and substance abuse centers, anything that you can really think of. And I loved what Rod said earlier about prevention, how important prevention is. If we see a situation where we don't have that reasonable cause to suspect abuse or neglect is going on, but there is a concern, it's just always helpful to just provide a resource that may prevent them from getting to that point where a call does need to be made. And I think this is just a super valuable resource. And that is
Thank
it.
you, Amanda. We did have a question in the chat. And
Okay.
it says, so if you mentioned another adult's name in the report that witnessed the abuse, the accused will be aware that this person's name is mentioned, even though the reporter's name is confidential?
If it is mentioned in an internet report, yes, they could know that because our staff is not able to alter that. If they mention them as a collateral on a phone report, they wouldn't be entered in the narrative of the report. They would be entered in the person list. So that is also another reason why it's very important. If you are doing an online report, don't include those additional collaterals in the narrative of that report while you're answering questions. Do it in the person list. And there's a place in the person list for notes if you want to explain why you put them there. This person has knowledge of XYZ, and that all is, the family does not see that information.
Okay, I hope that clarified the question. If you need more information, please let us know.
Mhm.
And I think that's all the questions I saw in there. Ileana, if you would like to join us and speak about the CACs and what you guys are doing with reports and services.
Yay. So let me try to share my screen here. Can you hear me? Perfect.
Yes.
Okay. So let me go over here. Oops.
This is such great information, guys. Really appreciate your time.
Okay. Here you go. Here we go. Now.
Okay,
Okay.
we can see it.
You have it? Okay,
Yes.
perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us here today. So my name is Ileana Arambula Dove, and I am a CSEC family support specialist and a high-risk youth coordinator. CSEC stands for Child Sexual Exploitation of Children. And I'm going to talk to y'all a little bit today about our services in the MDT response and how we handle these cases that rise to a criminal level, because those are the cases that come to us, and then focus a little bit on our high-risk youth program. So just to give you a little bit of background, because I know a lot of you have heard about CACs before, but our purpose of our CAC is to reduce trauma, to coordinate between agencies, to ensure the access of ongoing care, and of course, to provide the best outcome for criminal cases. And these are set by standards by the National Children's Alliance and CACs of Texas, as well as, of course, the Texas Family Code of 246, I believe, that really outlines the guidelines and the requirements of the CACs and multidisciplinary teams. Okay, so Dallas Children's Advocacy Center, who we are, we coordinate the investigation, prosecution, and healing for child abuse victims. There are about 70 CACs across Texas, covering almost all counties. Our center covers only Dallas County just because of the sheer size of Dallas County. We work with 27 law enforcement jurisdictions, the district attorney's office, medical professionals, mental health, and we serve last year alone, we served over 8,000 victims. And we're going to cover here in a little bit our criteria for which cases we actually service here at DCAC. So a little bit of our MDT coordination and how it works and how we receive these intakes from DFPS and law enforcement. So we have a total of 8 coordinators on our team. 2 of them focus on our child sex trafficking or high-risk youth victims, and then the other 6 focus on what we call traditional abuse cases, which is our traditional sex abuse, physical abuse that rises to a criminal level, etc. For our fiscal year of 2020, just for you to get an idea of numbers, we had about 27,000 intakes processed. And what that means is, so we receive all intakes, DFPS intakes that come in through statewide intake. We receive them. We have a data clerk that all she does is enter this information into our system. And these are read by the 8 coordinators on our team. Every single intake gets read to meet our, to gauge whether they meet our criteria. And we had 120 or so CST victims that we coordinated for in 2020. That doesn't include referrals alone. Those are actual kiddos that we were able to verify were either confirmed trafficking victims or high-risk youth, which we'll talk about more in a little bit. So we can get these intakes from law enforcement themselves, or we can also get them from DFPS. And we'll talk a little bit here further about the recovery of trafficking victims and how that can initiate services through us. And one other way that is not listed here is we do get external referrals now. So what that means is kiddo may not need actual a forensic interview here, but they may need our continued services. They may need therapy, they may need advocacy or any of those services. Now, external referrals we only accept through DFPS or law enforcement. So say we get a referral from a school, we're not going to be able to accept that. But what we do in those circumstances is we make sure that we're going to screen and we're going to look at that referral, make sure, contact law enforcement to see if they've been involved in the past or DFPS, and then ask them to make that referral for those services. So what is our criteria for our services? So we are going to accept any case that rises to a criminal offense. Our age criteria is 0 to 17 at the time of the incident, or adults with developmental delays. So we accept all allegations of sex abuse, all. Doesn't matter how severe, any allegation that comes in as sex abuse is gonna meet our criteria. We accept severe physical abuse cases. So that's going to be multiple injuries on any child under the age of 6, most cases involving burns, any child death cases. We also accept witnesses to sex abuse, severe physical abuse, or any of those, as well as child abductions and sex trafficking and high-risk victims.
Ileana, I hate to interrupt you, but did you mean to?
I want to talk a little bit of what our multidisciplinary team and what that looks like, because that is the heart of our CAC. And this is something that every CAC across Texas, what they utilize. Now, it may look different specifically to the needs of their community, but overall, these are the partners that will be involved. We're going to have law enforcement and CPS. So child is brought to DCAC by either of these.
Elena?
We will make sure.
One moment. I'm sorry to say, your PowerPoint is not advancing to the next slide. And we just want to make
no.
sure folks that can see that information. Sorry for the interrupting.
No. Okay, so, oh no, let me see what I need to do here. So you're still on the first slide?
Purpose of CAC. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry to interrupt your flow.
No, thank you. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing for a second. Is it still on the first one?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Ileana, I had the same issue. I had to click forward on the presentation view. So if you have
Okay.
another monitor, you might have to click through on that page.
We see multidisciplinary team now. So
Okay, and now I'm going to open this one. Oh, give me a second. So I think what you're saying is, okay, what do you see now?
Multidisciplinary team. We still see your side navigation, but we see that multidisciplinary team. So you could continue presuming the way you are, just clicking the next slide down manually, and it would keep the flow going.
Okay, let me just try it to make sure.
Yes, ma'am.
Is that good?
No, it's still on MDT.
Oh, see? Okay. I'm only on one monitor, so let me see here. See, I should have tried. I'm going to end it for a second.
There you go. Now it's on roles and responsibilities for MDT.
So, yeah, if you keep clicking down like you just did, it'll advance the slides and you can keep it the way it is. If that's
okay,
the
well, I
easiest for you.
apologize. Yeah. I apologize if some of this is going to be a little small for you then. Okay, so this is where I was at. I want to show you our beautiful chart table here. Okay, so picking up on either law enforcement or CPS bringing in the kiddo to DCAC. Now, we only accept forensic interview requests from law enforcement. And that's simply because all of our cases that meet our criteria have to rise to that criminal level. So if CPS has a case that needs a forensic interview, law enforcement should be involved. So for now, that is how we operate, where law enforcement will contact us. Kiddo is brought in for the interview, and that's where our MDT response really takes off. We're going to do our joint investigation. We're going to make sure that CPS and law enforcement are sharing all the information from the forensic interview itself to any evidence collected, witness interviews, and of course, any medical. One of the things that we really focus on is the role of the different partners that we work with in agencies, and really educating around law enforcement is grounded in public safety. They want to make sure that if a criminal offense occurred and can be prosecuted, that happens. And that the role of CPS is to ensure that the child is safe within their home. So ultimately, we all want the best outcomes for our kiddos, but that may look a little different for each agency. And what we want to do is we want to make sure that we're all involved in that communication. So as coordinators, we coordinate what we call case review or staffings. At DCAC, we have multiple staffings a week just because of the sheer volume of cases. And for those staffings, we're going to be staffing cases where a kiddo did make an outcry during their forensic interview. And we want to make sure that partners are up to date with that information. It may be that a detective is having a hard time getting a hold of a caregiver, or CPS is having a hard time getting a hold of the caregiver. So they're able to aid each other in, maybe one has more updated contact information, anything relevant that can be helpful to partners as they're working together. Now at DCAC, we have a chief of partner relations that oversees these partnerships and relationships that we have with law enforcement, CPS. So whenever we have any issues that may be happening, or maybe because of it may be staff turnover, all of a sudden you have people that have left teams and you don't know who to contact. Our partner relations team takes care of always being up to date to have those contacts and being able to share those with our partners. Okay, so some of our, I really want to go into roles and responsibilities. We've covered a little bit about law enforcement, and Amanda did a wonderful job with a child with CPS, covering CPS. We also have our prosecution. We actually have one of the Dallas County ADA housed here at DCAC, which is wonderful because many, many times law enforcement can just walk down the hall, as we also have the child abuse unit for Dallas Police Department housed in our building. We also we partner with Children's Health as well as Medical City, and we are able to have them in our staffings, and they could provide the most up-to-date information. And then, of course, we have DCAC and the ongoing services that a family can receive, which we'll go into a little bit more. So what does the services journey look like with DCAC? So again, it comes in, you could say the point of entry would be our multidisciplinary team coordination. So that's going to be a coordinator reviewing a case, whether it's an external referral or it's, again, the statewide intake, or law enforcement contacting us for a forensic interview themselves, and then we loop in DFPS if needed. And we kind of break it down into our multidisciplinary team enhancement program, which covers those traditional cases, and then our trafficking and high-risk cases. In our forensic services and what that looks like. So the day of the forensic interview, there is a family advocate who is going to speak to the caregiver after we do a pre-staffing, where we get all the information from law enforcement, from CPS, any relevant information of maybe previous history of the family, maybe there's information about other perpetrators in the home, anything like that. That's going to happen during pre-staffing. Law enforcement is going to let our family advocate and our interviewer know what sort of questions need to be asked during the interview. They'll let the family advocate know what she can share with a protective caregiver that's here with the family. And they'll give them a brief overview of those DCAC services. Our family advocates, our day of FI, really take the time to speak to these caregivers, because as we know, they are coming here for, sometimes parents don't even know the details of what they're coming for here. So those family advocates really work with those families on that day, and then they'll set up a consecutive appointment so that they can come in with the child for what we call a screening with an advocate to see if actual therapeutic services will be needed. Now, going back to our forensic services, we do have 8 interviewers on our team, 4 of whom are bilingual in English and Spanish. And we schedule interviews for throughout the day, Monday to Friday, for any priority 2 cases. But we also have an on-call team for any of our priority 1 cases, and that's 24/7. They can come in middle of the night anytime. So about our therapy and supportive services, I really want to share some of this with you all, because I think this may be where there are some questions about what that looks like and how the school system can support any families that are engaging in any service with a CAC. So our therapy services offer 4 different modalities of therapy. And I did have to write these down because they tend to be a mouthful. So we're going to offer CFTSI, which is the Child and Family Traumatic Stress Intervention, the PCIT, which is the Parent-Child Interaction Therapy, EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and our most common is TFCBT, which is trauma-focused cognitive behavior therapy. So these are the 4 modalities that are used here when our family advocate is screening our kiddos. This is what they're looking for, whether any of these therapies are needed. And they're going to also be screening for the urgency of those needs. It may be that a kiddo is symptomatic, but is doing well in the home with that protective caregiver, and they can be put on a waiting list, or it may be a child that needs immediate services, and they're going to get bumped on our waiting list, so we make sure they get those services immediately. We also have our PSB program, the Problematic Sexual Behavior Program, which focuses on those cases where it may be child on child under the age of 10, where abuse is occurring, or it may be a case of a juvenile perpetrator who, for some reason or another, law enforcement will not be pressing any charges, and that they will not be adjudicated. In those cases, this problematic sexual behavior program, which is another form of therapy, is offered through our center. Now, one thing for our therapy services as well is that one thing our families advocate screeners are going to really look into is what services the family may already be receiving outside of DCAC. Sometimes families will tell us that their child is already in therapy services somewhere else. They may be engaged in the school system with a counselor or anything like that. It may be addressing the abuse that occurred. It may not be. So that's what they're going to screen for. And it may be that they've already developed rapport with someone outside of our agency. And if that's the case, we're going to get consent from those protective caregivers to reach out to those people and see if any of these forms of therapy that we use are something that they can use to address the abuse that has occurred. So I'm going to jump into our trafficking or high-risk youth program. I'm not going to go over definitions again because we've already done that. But what I do want to focus on a bit is we have to remember that for victims of trafficking that are children, there does not have to be any force, fraud, or coercion to be happening like it does in adult trafficking cases. So that is something that I always want to focus on. And then our high-risk youth. So one thing that DCAC does that not all teams will be, care coordinations team outside of here will be doing is working with our high risk. And we model our criteria for our high-risk youth after the Dallas Police Department High-Risk Victims Unit. And this is our criteria for how we're going to decide if a kiddo is going to be on this continuum of care. So any child who has a runaway of more than 4 times in a 12-month period, report it to law enforcement. So we want to make sure that these are cases where these runaways, it's not a one-time thing, or it's not that they're skipping school and maybe going to the mall during the day. We're focusing on these recurrent runaways that are gone for a couple of days. Rod mentioned how any kiddo on runaway on the street, within 48 hours of being out there, they will be approached by a trafficker in some way, shape, or form. So that's where we really want to focus our efforts. Any child under the age of 12 or younger that is on that runaway status. So regardless of how many times it's been on in a 12-month period, any child under the age of 12. Children who have been on runaway for over 30 consecutive days, that's very alarming. And children with 2 or more separate incidences of sex abuse or exploitation in a 12-month period. So if a kiddo has been abused by 2 separate perpetrators on different occasions, we want to see what's going on. We want to see why they're being vulnerable to these type of situations. And a lot of times it can be that we're focusing on the sex abuse and not focusing on all of the surrounding components, which can include trafficking. And then we also utilize a screening tool called the CIT, which is the Commercial Sexual Exploitation Identification Tool. And that is a screening tool utilized by some providers. Locally in Dallas, it's utilized by Dallas County Juvenile Department, which we do partner with, as well as Traffic 911, which is the trafficking agency we partner with. CASA uses this tool. Within DFPS, we have all special investigators within DFPS that work with trafficking cases and high-risk cases will utilize this screening tool. And if a kiddo score, it's from a range of 0 to 23. Anything above 9 is a clear concern for trafficking. And what that means is, even though it can't be proven, a lot of times these kiddos will not disclose. They're not going to say, oh yes, I'm a trafficking victim. Even within a forensic interview, we know it's highly likely that it's happening, and we still want them to receive services. And those services are exactly the same as those for our confirmed trafficking victims. And all of this came about from a task force created through the Office of the Governor in 2017, where we really wanted to focus and recognize that the trafficking of children is another form of child abuse. Sometimes victims won't look the same. A victim of child sex trafficking, it could be a 16-year-old who thinks that she's in a relationship with her trafficker. They believe that they have to be loyal to them because of the complex trauma that they've experienced. When they present, they may present as defiant, as angry, all of these things. And it can be hard to say this is another victim of child abuse, because it doesn't look like a typical 8-9-year-old who experienced sex abuse maybe in the home. So through the Office of the Governor, this initiative was started, and I feel like this is very small for you all to see. So I'm going to, well, no, I think if I open it, you're still not going to be able to see it. So I apologize for this, but I'll go through it. This was taken from CAC of Texas, which does a great job of comparing and seeing why it is that CAC became kind of the hub of this initiative. And we're tasked with being what we call the care coordinators of these teams that respond to trafficking victims. Because we're able to see how we're utilizing the same multidisciplinary team model that we know works for child abuse cases. We're not reinventing anything, but we're applying it to our sex trafficking and high-risk victims, which just means we'll have some more partners involved. An amendment was done to investigative protocols that we already have in place, where we can include more service providers outside of the ones that we typically utilize, because we want to make sure that we are bringing everyone to the table who needs to be involved in these cases. So we still have our forensic interview team. We have our law enforcement. We have DFPS if needed. One of the things that we're looking at is, Amanda mentioned how it may be a case where it's not familial trafficking that's occurring, but we want to make sure that if it's a kiddo who has those very high runaways, what is happening in the home that those runaways are occurring. So a special investigator will always observe the forensic interview of a high-risk victim to see if anything has been happening in the home, and maybe another report needs to be generated that focuses on whatever is happening in the home. Okay. We still have monthly staffings of these cases. For the criminal component, we want to make sure that everybody is sharing information. One add-on to this is we also have service status meetings where we establish a continuum of care for these kiddos that are a part of this. And we ensure that we're also staffing services if anything criminal is not being pursued. Again, some of these kiddos most of them will not disclose anything, and we still want to be able to make sure partners are communicating about the services the kiddo needs. So what does our continuum of care look like? So there's a couple of ways a kiddo can enter our continuum of care, and it's through our traditional care coordination, where our MDT will read those statewide intakes and an allegation of trafficking is made. So those will be routed to one of our high-risk youth care coordinators, who will start that process. It may be upon the recovery of a victim by law enforcement or DFPS. Sometimes special investigators who are assigned to kids in foster care that are on runaway, they'll recover those kiddos and they'll contact our hotline. We have a 24/7 hotline for investigative agencies for these recoveries. And upon that recovery of a youth, a care coordinator will be contacting all the partners that are needed for that immediate response. And that includes law enforcement, that special investigator with DFPS, a trafficking agency advocate. Locally, we partner with Traffic 911, as well as New Friends, New Life. Traffic 911 is in the field, so they will respond 24/7. So we contact them. It may involve contacting a family advocate if we do have a protective caregiver that's coming with a child. And for sure, it's going to involve our medical partners. One thing we want to make sure is that a youth is getting a medical screening at the time of recovery, because for some of our kiddos that are constantly on runaway or get recovered and run again, sometimes the only medical care that they can receive is during that time of that recovery. And that may not always be evidence collection, forensic evidence collection with a SANE. It may just be a lab work and pregnancy, STI screening, and any medications that may be needed. So we talked about staffings a little bit. Another component that we have that's a little different is we have rapid response calls. So whenever these recoveries happen within a couple of days, a care coordinator is going to schedule something where we all get on the phone within 48 hours to see where that youth is. Because within those 48 hours, that is our crisis intervention. That's where the most change can happen. That is when a kiddo who, if they're set on running, they're usually going to run within those days. A change in placement maybe, and we want to make sure that all partners involved have all that the information needed. We're going to, upon special circumstances, we're going to have special staffings. This happens a lot with these kiddos where there's heightened concerns of what is happening. And this usually is initiated by the advocates who they really form a really a healthy relationship with, almost a mentorship. And a lot of times, once these kiddos are on this continuum, they're the ones who they're going to reach out to during runaways when kiddos themselves want to come back, whether it's into care or they want to come home. Many times it's the advocate that they'll reach out to. We also have family focus team meetings. That's very important to mention here, because this is where it may be that a protective caregiver may be asking someone from the school to participate in this. So during those family focus team meetings, we want to include all of our partners as well as our protective caregiver and the youth if they choose to be on this. But the caregiver has the option to invite any support system that she may have outside of our MDT partners. And that may look like a school counselor, or it may look like a teacher who they've really built trust with. So in those circumstances, a care coordinator would be reaching out for a release of information to include you all on those virtual calls. And then our service status meetings, which I mentioned earlier, where we just want to make sure that the youth, if they're in placement, they're doing well. If they're on runaway, what efforts are being made for those recoveries. And this is our continuum of care. We're going to keep a child that enters the continuum for whatever reason, we're going to keep them on here up until they turn 18. That trafficking agencies that we work with will actually continue to work with them past that. But that's where our care coordination will end with a family focused team meeting or something along those lines, while they still are able to continue their services outside with their trafficking agency. I really wanted to share this with you all, and this is so small. Wait a minute here. Maybe able to do something. Oh, too big. Okay. So this is something that I took from our therapy team, which focuses on how can we be trauma informed in the classroom. I can see how many times maybe a teacher that makes a report to DFPS, or maybe they haven't made a report, but they know that something maybe has happened in the past and has already been investigated. So it may have been them that made that report, but the case has been closed, everything's been done.
Ileana, we lost sound. We can't hear you.
Screenshot this, or maybe I can send it if we're going to get a list of participants.
Elena, I'm sorry to say your microphone is cutting in and out.
Okay, is
There we
this
go.
better?
Yes.
Do I need to repeat? Do I need to repeat anything?
The fact that we're going to gather the slides and we'll email them out to participants. We gave a link to where the webinar will be posted. So your contact information you were about to share would be great.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay.
And we have 1 minute left.
Okay. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Much information. Okay. So, so one thing I do want to mention is being familiar or becoming familiar with whatever protocol your agency has in place. And if there isn't one, making sure that there is one, reaching out to your local CAC or reaching out to us. And here is our contact information to see if we can guide you. I also included Lana Ahrens on here. She is our Director of Training Community Outreach. And we love to go and present anywhere that will welcome us. Doesn't have to be inside Dallas County, and just guide you all on how you can start your own local responses.
Thanks,
you.
Ileana. Quick question. Do you only address familial investigations or any type of investigation?
For trafficking specific, it's any trafficking case, any sex trafficking case, regardless of it's within the family or not. In fact, it's very rare that it's within the family.
And so what about outside of that?
For our sex abuse, physical abuse, it's going to be any. It doesn't have to be, we don't have to have DFPS involvement to coordinate our cases.
Gotcha. Perfect.
Or for those forensic interviews and subsequent services.
Okay, that's a lot of information. We appreciate your hanging in there with us. Thanks to the presenters for your awesome knowledge and sharing. We will share the decks with everyone who attended today. And if you saw in the chat, Rod posted the link for So we hope you join us for the next one, the next round, and let us know if we can help you in the interim.
Thanks, everyone.